So what do we make of the first race under the new 2026 regulations? I think it's fair to say that it has divided opinion among fans and drivers. I think some love them, some hate them, some are yet to make up their minds. But we've got our first real glimpse of what these new rules are all about. It really was a step into the unknown, but now we've got a bit more of an idea about how these new rules work and what is good and bad about them. So what do we make of them? And more importantly, what do the drivers think? Well, there's one driver in particular who is very vocal. Unsurprisingly, that's Max Verstappen. He absolutely hates these new rules and new cars. But is he right? First up, let's talk about qualifying, because like I said, that was our first real glimpse at what these 2026 cars were all about. And to be honest, it doesn't fill me with great optimism about what these new rules are going to do for the spectacle. Because what we saw wasn't a proper qualifying session, was it? It wasn't drivers being on the ragged edge, on the limit of what the car's potential is, wrestling the cars through the corners, experiencing 5-6G through some of the fast corners. No, it was all about battery management. That's what these new rules are all about. It's about managing the battery and the energy around the lap as much as you can so that you're not starving the battery and that you've got enough to complete a lap. It's a completely different version of Formula 1 that we're used to, and it was a complete farce. Instead of opening the lap before the final corner, you had drivers waiting till they were halfway down the main straight to go full pelt and start their qualifying laps in order to save battery for around the lap. And then, as they were going around the circuit, they were having to brake around 300 to 500 metres before a corner to harvest the energy so that they had enough battery level for the next straight. So in essence, we have lost the true qualifying that we're used to F1 producing. And for me, this has got to be top priority for Formula 1 to resolve and refine going forward, because this is where cars are at their lightest and should be driven to their maximum, not constantly managed around the lap. So we've lost that spectacle. Some drivers were already on the bandwagon of not liking these new cars and new regulations after that qualifying session, in particular, unsurprisingly, Max, but also Lando Norris as well. Verstappen wasn't just unimpressed by the feeling that he was getting from these cars, it was also the emotion that he was experiencing in the cockpit. He actually said he felt completely empty. And that wasn't just because he qualified near the back of the grid after his crash in qualifying. Even if he qualified at the front of the grid in normal circumstances, he would have said exactly the same. And Max called what was going to happen as early as 2023 when he experienced the cars for the first time in the simulator. He warned that it was all going to be about who had the best engine and not driving as fast as possible, but being much more manageable behind the wheel and basically diverting away from what racing is all about. Lando was just as critical of the regulations. He even went as far to say that the current cars are now the worst ever, and that the previous generation of cars, even though they were difficult to overtake and follow in, particularly at the end of the regulation cycle, they were so much more fun to drive and far better. So it's interesting for the drivers, got more pleasure from driving the previous generation of cars to the current ones. I would say, just to give a balanced view on qualifying, but I do like how sketchy and unpredictable these cars look to drive. They do look quite a handful, and there wasn't one driver through practice and qualifying that didn't experience a lock-up, a sudden snap, or even a sudden spike in electrical deployment. Everybody made mistakes, and that's what F1 should be. It should be difficult, it should be challenging. So I hope that F1 is open to refining how qualifying is run later in the season. How it fixes it, I don't know. I don't think it's an easy fix. But they do need to come up with a solution to the cars being starved of a full battery down a long straight. Let's move on to the race itself, because for me, for the first race of these new regulations, I think it was a decent one. It was very action-packed and entertaining, particularly in those first few laps when we had battles galore. Even for the lead between Russell and Leclerc, they swapped, I think, 4 times in that opening 8 laps. But it did seem a bit too chaotic, and I couldn't make up my mind while watching it if what we were seeing was real racing or if it was just artificial. It does seem to sway towards the latter, this yo-yoing of using all of your battery and energy to produce an overtake, only to then be vulnerable to being repassed immediately because you're then having to save all of your energy. It didn't always feel like we were watching proper overtaking. Some, to be fair, I think were done without the need of the battery and done under braking, but some were just simply too easy, a bit like a simple DRS pass. It didn't help that it wasn't easy to follow or understand while watching on TV. We really did need graphics on the screen for us to know who was using their overtake mode and boost mode at which times around the lap, and also how much battery each driver had. We did get that after about 15 laps, but we really needed that much more constantly from FOM, so that we had that information as much as possible to give us a clearer picture of what was going on. By the second half of the race, it felt like the chaos had depleted and it was much more akin to a typical F1 race. It became much more about strategy, Could you get to the end of the race by just doing the one stop, or did you need to make a second stop? And you could see as the race went on that drivers were just learning more and more about these new cars and how to be much more tactical with deploying their battery while in battle. Again, there was a split between the drivers about how much enjoyment they got from driving these new cars. You had them ranging from it's artificial and not fun to drive, it's not what we're used to it was actually fun to drive. The impression that I had while watching it was there were phases during the race that were fun to watch. It certainly wasn't boring, it was enjoyable, but it didn't always feel pure. F1 actually released a graphic detailing how many overtakes there were during the race compared to last year, and it was 120, up from 45 in 2025. But as I always say, more overtaking doesn't necessarily lead to better racing. I'd rather have quality over quantity. I was encouraged by the fact that Mercedes didn't just walk away with the race like we fear that they might, and they actually had to work to win it. Ferrari really did give them something to think about, and had they decided to pit at least one of their cars under the VSC, I think they would have at least split the two Mercs by the end of the Grand Prix. But it is at least good that Ferrari were there to keep Mercedes on their toes. So there is genuinely some positives to take away from this first race of the new regulations, and I don't think we should be too hasty in our verdicts just yet. Now, we've got to give it a little bit of time. We've got to remember also, Melbourne is actually one of the worst tracks for these new regulations, in particular energy deployment, and China is actually one of the better tracks for this. So let's see after a few races if our initial fears are true and they need to be addressed as quickly as possible. There is definitely some hope that these new rules can create some good racing. I am optimistic to an extent and prepared to definitely give them some time. You know, we do need to give them a chance to mature and develop, but F1 is under massive scrutiny, that's very clear. So I hope that it's not going to shy away from reacting and refining these rules to make everybody happy. So there you are, guys, we are off and running in 2026. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on the race itself and also what you make of the new regulations in the comment section. Also, be sure to like the video, and if you are new around here, please do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.